Welcome to this Reuters webinar on future-proofing of procurement, strategic risk management for a resilient supply chain. Thank you for joining us. My name is Deborah Dole. I'm the founder of the Circular Supply Chain Network and your moderator for today's discussion. We have excellent panelists who you see with me here today who will introduce themselves in just a moment. Together, we're going to explore this intersection of risk management, procurement, and supply chain strategy with a focus and a lens on sustainability and resilience. You have the option to engage with us to ask questions throughout this session. So if it comes to mind, you don't need to wait to the end. You can ask those and we'll answer them throughout. You'll see that in the questions section Q&A. Put them in there and not in the chat. We'll see them if they come in through Q&A. We're also going to ask you a couple of poll questions throughout, so you'll be able to see the results of each other's answers as well. So keep an eye on your screen and we'll let you know when those are coming out. Together, we've got three goals. First, to explore how the current geopolitical shifts and climate impacts are impacting our operations. The second is that we'll discuss the key risks and challenges that we see today and what we're doing about them. And three, share practical solutions so you can take those back to your teams. Now I'll turn to our panelists for introductions. Panelists, as you introduce yourselves, please, of course, introduce you, who you are, what you spend your day doing, and also please share what brings you into the conversation today and why is strategic risk management in procurement a priority for your organization. Sylvia, I'll ask that you please kick us off.
Great. Thank you, Deborah. I'm Sylvia Schmid. I'm an account manager with EcoVadis. EcoVadis is a purpose-driven company providing sustainability intelligence in the form of ratings, as well as integrated risk, carbon, and e-learning tools. All is designed to improve sustainability performance for businesses and their value chains, mitigate risk, of course, and improve resilience. And I'm happy to be here today to provide the perspective from our EcoVadis network of companies. And I'm even happier to see that many of our clients are in the audience today. So thank you very much for joining. Strategic risk management procurement is definitely a priority for most companies in the EcoVadis network. Especially teams are looking at ESG factors in supplier selection. We see companies feeling the impact of growing ESG regulatory complexity. They're looking at ESG data because it helps to increase business continuity, avoid supply chain disruptions, avoid reputational and operational risks, but also regulatory and compliance risk to that end. So very happy to be here and discuss this and other trends that we see, such as more technology investments, as well as a focus from companies to really identify suppliers that are most vulnerable to climate risks.
Perfect. Thank you for joining us, Sylvia. And technical investments sure are the topic of the day, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit together. And as you mentioned, with so many of your customers in the audience today, hopefully they can walk away with some new uses for the tool. Mindy, I'll turn it to you next, please.
Thanks, Deborah. Good afternoon, and depending where you are in the world, good afternoon, good evening. Mindy Deliri, and I serve as Vice President of Responsible Sourcing at the Estee Lauder Companies. Hopefully, most folks are familiar with us, but we have more than 20 iconic brands in the prestige beauty space. Our responsible sourcing team is part of the global procurement organization, and we work cross-functionally to establish, implement, and monitor environmentally and socially responsible sourcing practices. So that means that we collaborate across all of our brands, suppliers, different industry groups, and peers to continuously advance our practices. We really prioritize respect for human rights and minimizing environmental impacts and protecting biodiversity. I'm personally really excited for the discussion today because strategic risk management in procurement is essential. It directly impacts business continuity, as Sylvia mentioned, cost control, supplier resilience, and ESG compliance. And for procurement professionals, especially in global organization, the stakes are really high. So ranging from geopolitical disruptions to climate-related supply chain vulnerabilities, there's many risks out there around every corner. So it's a really relevant discussion. I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you, Mindy. And risks around every corner. I think everybody here can relate to that today. It seems like there's always something. And on the one hand, it stresses us out sometimes. And on the other hand, it's why we're all in the field, I think, because no 2 days are the same. So we can talk a little bit later on how it is that we identify those risks and how do we try to tackle them. Fabiano, thank you for joining us. Over to you now, please.
Hi, hello to all attendees. Fabiano Lopez, I work at Cardinal Health. I'm responsible for all indirect procurement within Cardinal Health. And my dual head is also leading the cost management for the organization. In the procurement space, we have targets and metrics for ESG that we track on a monthly basis, and we try our best to comply and mitigate all the risks associated with those. It's important for us, especially because our supply chain, to a certain extent, is what we do for a living, and we have to be a little bit ahead of the curve on that instance from a performance as well as cost point of view too. We do have already a starting on that, like our vehicles, when we have the ability to leverage hybrid or electric, we're starting to do that right now. And there are some other initiatives internally to optimize the spend around environment and ESG causes.
Perfect. And I look forward to hearing more about that from you. So let's get into our first real topic, which is around the geopolitical and climate risk landscape. To set the stage for our discussion, I'm going to spend a few minutes grounding for today's context. If you're joining us, like I just mentioned, it's probably no surprise at all, the environment that we're in today, the headlines that we see. And so the purpose of these next couple of minutes is just so that we're all on the same page. I'll highlight 3 recent headlines I read about in the news about the geopolitical and climate risk landscape, and then how it's impacting our supply chains and how it might be impacting your world. The first headline, no surprise, is all about AI. It's really hard to avoid AI these days in the conversation there. Depending on which study that you look at, over 90% of procurement executives are now using Gen AI once a week or more themselves. So not whether their organization is using it, but they themselves are using it. And it almost becomes like an Amazon effect, doesn't it? That once we start experiencing something ourselves as a consumer, we have bigger expectations of our organizations and of our partners. And AI, of course, is a really interesting one. As we move more manual work from our teams and into the cloud, there's pluses and minuses. The pluses is we can help our teams make better decisions. There's another study out that says, compared to 3 years ago, we make 10 times more decisions every day than we did. And we're expected to use data to make data-driven decisions. So it's 10 times more decisions with more data that's not all in the same place. And so now we're expected to find the data and analyze it and make these great decisions. And so when we ask our teams, of course, hey, make sure you also keep in mind these ESG factors as you're making these decisions, we can lean on AI to make better decisions by gathering those information pieces together. And of course, there's cons. As we think about the demand for AI growing, we can see issues in data and security and ethics, human AI interactions, and some of these decisions go through our procurement teams. So before we engage with a certain provider, we need to understand, does this lead to a responsible operation? And of course, as we expand the cloud, which is a real physical place, we see risks to the materials coming into our supply chains. So the theme to me around AI in the news is data and how we think about data and security, responsible operations. And the second as materials. So that's theme number 1 we see. Theme number 2 is headlines around regulation. It's an interesting time. I've had actually quite a few conversations recently around regulation, and The Trump administration's promise to a deregulated environment so that business can operate more freely. But if we think about the last decade, ESG regulation has increased 155% worldwide, which is 2,500 policies. And as the US federal government deregulates, states are actually increasing regulation. California has become almost a de facto national standard since the regulations that they pass end up impacting 75% of the Fortune 1000 companies. And of course, New York has also been proposing supply chain mapping requirements. And at the same time, we're seeing anti-ESG bills in a couple of states. So what does this mean? It means there's a backlash on sustainability in ESG today that we'll unpack and explore. And it means the regulation still stands. So we still need to comply, and there's still some reporting regulations that we have. And even though today's discussion is focused on the North American operations, all of the supply chains here today represent global supply chains. Very, very few items are mined and processed and sold all within the United States. So we're part of this global network. And so as we go through different countries, we need to understand the responsible business expectations of us as we go through. So we've talked about AI, we've talked about regulation. The third one is tariffs. Also a hot topic these days. What can we do to mitigate that risk? So there's a risk to material shortages from our impacted suppliers. So we might be working closely with a supplier on an ESG program, for example, and they might get impacted by this change. And there's also a risk of a higher cost coming into our supply chain. In the green room, right before this conversation, Fabiano was talking about how the work to reduce, to have cost savings is on his team. But these days we have additional costs we need to mitigate perhaps. And so one interesting perspective I saw on this is how we can mitigate tariffs with proper master data. The more that we know about our suppliers and where they are and our items, it's helpful because most supply chains can't see very far into their upstream operations, which also means that we don't see very much around human rights and ethics and diligence and everything that we all talked about in our introductions. The stat I'll share here, and then we'll wrap up this grounding, is that only about half of supply chain leaders see their master data quality as adequate. Not good, but just adequate. So we've got some work to do on our data expectations. So that's the grounding for today. That's how I see the world and our geopolitical risks and climate, a few themes that are common for all of us. So now I'll ask the panelists to react on this and to share for their supply chains top of mind risk. And this is a big question. How current ESG risks, trade and economic risks like labor or tariffs, geopolitical risks like the regulation that we're talking through, what's one or two ways that this is impacting your approach to procurement strategies? And while we're at it, do we still call it ESG internally, or have you adopted a different term? And thank you for the audience for already engaging in questions. We'll come to you after this round, as well as a poll. Fabiano, I'll start with you on this question. It's a large one, so if you can share one or two key points, that would be very helpful.
Yeah. So I'll touch one point. Like we've got two items here, right? So one is our master data per se. We still need a little bit of work, so we are increasing our visibility across that, right? And doing a lot of work this year to help enhance the data points we have. To your point, Deborah, we don't have a very good visibility up the chain, right? Now, on the other side, we do have a very good control of our spend. So our spend management is really good. So we are trying to balance those two things out, right? And putting a little bit of more money on the one side and maintaining the other productive for us, right? In a production level for us that helps us identify savings and opportunities. Now, because of that, we've when the new administration came on board with the tariffs, we had a little bit of a hard time estimating what would be the impact, right? We ended up having to reach out to vendors and understanding a little bit more of their supply chain. We rely a little bit on how we negotiated some of the agreements, but it was very hard to achieve a kind of like an aligned level of impact, because we have a bunch of vendors globally. We don't know how they source a lot of their materials, but we ended up finding a number, but the risk was there, right? The risk was we could be completely wrong in our numbers. And finally, the aspect related to ESG regulations. Um, with the new administration, I think those regulations are going to ease out. And as I mentioned before, I think it was to you that we we see that as a responsibility for the leadership going forward, right? Because the regulations going away, it's going to be up to the leadership of each company to address and maintain the rigors or not, right? And and that's another risk that we're going to see is uneven levels of commitment to ESG going forward because of these discrepancies.
Thank you very much. It's interesting when we think about how much we do and don't know about our supply chain. We call it our supply chain, but in reality, no one company is actually in charge of a supply chain. That's what makes it so interesting, is that we're just a chain of independent companies that all work together to actually help society function. So it's really an interesting exercise for us to go through and figure out how much do we know, how much influence do we have, and how much good behavior can we inspire. Mindy, I'll come to you next. Same question. It's a large one. So again, one or two key points or takeaways on how your organization is handling this now.
Yeah, we take a risk-based approach to due diligence. So we're using, a variety of methods to verify supplier compliance, for example, with our code of conduct. And this includes everything from on-site audits and third-party assessments such as EcoVadis, which generate a large volume of data. And so we're continuously, monitoring, understanding, watching data, to look for emerging trends, changes. And, in many cases, we're seeing encouraging progress in our supply chain. So we're learning, we're seeing suppliers actively enhance their management systems, adopt stronger practices. But at the same time, we're also remaining vigilant for, any red flags or rising, trends in terms of non-conformances. And then we also, while it's easy to kind of stay in the weeds of, watching our own suppliers, direct suppliers, and understanding what's going on, it's also, I think, important to kind of zoom out and take a step back and consider the broader operating environment that our suppliers are working in. And, as you said, while today's webinar is focused on North America, we're all global organizations. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find a company that is not connected, globally. We're sourcing from well over 100 countries. And this global footprint really requires us to monitor news and developments and really, for my role, we're looking at it with a critical lens about how those, whether it's geopolitical unrest or weather events or, war, whatever's happening in the world, we're really looking at how those events may impact human rights or environmental conditions, and how it impacts workers and in our value chain.
It's really interesting. And it's a good reminder on sourcing from over 100 countries. And it's not like it goes from the country to the shelf. It goes through many different stops along the way as well. And all those stops impact human beings, our communities that we pass through, either work in our factories, around our factories, move our goods, buy our goods. And so the impacts are far reaching. Great examples there on how we can partner with technology, because a vast number of data sources you just mentioned is just simply too much for a team of humans to do. And also great to mention the pause and to step back at the broader environment that our suppliers and our customers are also working inside of. And Sylvia, that's where I think you've got really unique perspective across a broader industry. So again, broad question on how you all are approaching this now and the trends that you're seeing across your different customers.
Yeah, so definitely, glad to hear all the conversation around the data, right, and the data quality and how important that is. We are, seeing a lot of technology investments, companies just looking into, closing data and compliance gaps. We're seeing increased adoption and expansion in ESG risk mapping tools, as well as investments in carbon engagement platforms. We're seeing a lot of companies already having to respond to supply chain due diligence requirement. Actually, I remember this stat from, I think it was a Reuters study that found, in its survey that 74% of companies have already had to respond to some sort of supply chain due diligence requirement. And that's because, as we were just talking about, I mean, this complexity in the regulatory landscape is sending mixed signals, but it is impacting, the companies either directly or through the global partners. And we're seeing that especially from CSRD, CBAM, Canada's Modern Slavery Act, but also, as you mentioned, from regulations like states like California and New York who are advancing their own mandates. So we're all, seeing this hunger for data, but good data that is validated and data that can help make those decisions. And then lastly, and I hinted at this a little bit earlier, we're seeing really, a hunger for information around the ability of suppliers to be prepared for those climate risks. So seeing all those climate-related disruptions that continue to increase, they are destabilizing our supply chain, they are exposing businesses to new risks, insurance costs continue to go up, and now it's the job of procurement teams to also need to, evaluate the resilience strategies of their suppliers and really invest and prioritize those partnerships with suppliers who are more mature in this space. And at the same time, and Mindy, you mentioned this, work with existing suppliers to improve their carbon management practices because it's really becoming a priority here.
Oh, thank you very much. And it's interesting what you just said, that I work with the suppliers that are more mature in their space. One of the tough things that I've found is that as we go up the supply chain, we don't usually get more mature and more digitally enabled. As we go up and up and up, we start to see more and more mom and pops, and that's what we want. That's actually how we get our procurement dollars to make a lot of impact for a lot of communities. But they're not equipped to do some of what we need them to do. And so partnering together is really important. And all of a sudden, the procurement team gets to stretch even further to have these supplier engagement. We're going to get the first poll launched here so you all can weigh in. And as we do that, Sylvia, there's a really thoughtful question submitted that really comes down to how we can get better visibility into your roadmap for capabilities. So there's some existing capabilities on coverage of issues like energy use and data privacy and so forth. And there's an ask for even more, like you just mentioned, a hunger for more information around AI, around greenwashing, and around some of the newer emerging practices. Generally, how can people understand what to expect from the platform and when they'll see new capabilities?
That's a very good question. We do evaluate our methodology on a quarterly basis. So we do produce updates on how we improve our methodology to cover new topics, to include new details, to streamline questionnaires and other tools. So we do provide that information, and any feedback is always well received. A lot of our clients know that I and my colleagues are always asking for feedback because that's ultimately how we improve the tool that you practitioners are using. So thank you for submitting that question. And yeah, looking forward to hearing more. Please do contact us with your feedback.
All right, thanks, Sylvia. And if you've got a question, you can, again, submit those anytime. Please do it in the Q&A section, though, not in the chat, so we'll see them. And you've got a poll question up in front of you. Are you currently integrating ESG data into your supply chain risk management? Yes, no, or I don't know. We'll leave this up for just a couple moments longer before seeing the results, so you can also see how each other are faring. Would any of our panelists want to share if you all are using ESG as a term internally now, or have you moved on to a different type of a term?
Same.
Same. It's interesting because the research shows that businesses really are continuing as they were continuing a year ago. So, and if anything, actually investing more and doubling down more. So ESG can still be a term that we can use. Great. So if we can get the result of that poll, that would be great to see. And we will see those in a moment as they come up. We will move on now to our next major theme. Oh, here's the results. Hopefully everybody can see those now. So for the most part, 60% almost of folks here are integrating. That's great to see. And the remainder is either a no or an I don't know. If you're an I don't know, this seems like a great homework project for you to go see. If you have access to ESG data, and if so, are you incorporating that into your operations of any kind? It might be into risk, or it might be into the way that you procure. If you go and see how your organization procures, you might be delighted actually to see that it is considered alongside the procurement decisions that your organization is making. But sometimes going just to try to find out if this data exists is very telling in itself. All right, we're going on to our next theme now, which is really about, we've heard from our panelists how their organizations are generally approaching this idea of procurement and sustainability and risk. Now we'll focus on how do we identify these ESG related risks. ESG, of course, is huge. Environmental, social, and governance can mean just about anything. Governance captures cybersecurity. Social might capture human risks or rights. An environment could be anything from material use and battery reuse or climate change. So we've really got quite a large spectrum here. So I'm interested to hear from our panelists. Mindy, I'm going to start with you and ask, what early warning signals or indicators does your team use to monitor these ESG-related risks that may be lingering out? We talked a little bit about this earlier. So how do you go about even knowing that these risks might exist?
Yeah, and I touched on this a little bit, that we get a vast amount of data, looking at our how our suppliers are doing when, whether it's an on-the-ground audit and looking at, that information, but also leveraging the information that we get out of tools like EcoVadis and starting to look for different trends, and then, we also try to leverage different industry information as it relates to specific country risks or industry risks. So, looking really at the local context where we are operating, I think is another area, and way that we look for those kind of early warning signs. I think this is, it's a bit of an evolving science, I guess. Sometimes it's not a perfect, sometimes unfortunately you're learning about a risk in the news as everybody else is learning about it, or through different forums. But as much as we can, try to proactively understand where there might be hotspots, where we might see different trends. We try to get out ahead of those things. And we also really leverage partnerships and industry forums, different places where we can connect with peers, either in the beauty industry or beyond. Sometimes we'll take learnings from, whether it's the apparel industry or pharma, and we're kind of hearing, what are they learning, and how could that show up in our supply chain potentially. So we really have to take this multi-pronged approach, because I don't think there's any one perfect answer to how you can identify, where those risks are piping up.
Yeah, absolutely. Part art, part science, but helped along with data and tools that allow you to monitor different data sources, which you've talked about. Same question for you, Fabiano. What does it look like for your team to structure risks, and you've explained a little bit about living through some of these risks right now of really needing to engage with your suppliers to understand where materials might be coming from. Can you share a little bit about your approach?
Yeah, we kind of have a more reactive approach, to be honest. We tend to look at opportunities through the cost side, and if we see an ability for us to optimize our ESG impact at the same time reduce costs, it's kind of like how we are more on a reactive mode. We do proactively go and connect with vendors, and we're still in the young ages of our process for maturity on that end. But a good example is we had to replace a part of our car fleet, and we did so by moving to hybrid so that we could save on gas as well as help the environment. But overall, I think we've made some progress this past year to get more an understanding of the impact, but we still have a little bit of uh, way to go in that end.
Oh, that's great. It says something that I think is a great takeaway for folks, which is as you needed to upgrade your fleet, you took that advantage to make a different decision. Sometimes we tussle with how much of my supply chain do I need to replace right now to be better? But really, as these opportunities come up, then we can use these different pieces of information. And sometimes it's a win-win. It does cost less. Renewable energy, for example, is often less expensive where it is available for us to go and purchase. And Sylvia, I'm interested to hear from you, of course, again, across your customers, what you're seeing, and then also, how have you found the most successful structures? What do you advise for supply chains to do as they want to monitor the changes in supplier due diligence, for example, or some other risks that we have discussed?
Sure. So let me share a little bit about how our EcoVadis network of companies are, typically identifying ESG-related risks in the supply chain. So, they typically monitor early warning signals and indicators of various different ones. They do tend to adopt one single integrated approach that is digital, that can provide a comprehensive view. As Mindy was saying, there's so many things to track, right? And so what we try to do is to combine everything into one digital solution. And that can just allow to prioritize actions and signal where companies may need to dig a little bit deeper. So our clients typically start by doing an ESG risk mapping exercise of their full supply base. That allows them to identify those risk hotspots, and then identifying those suppliers that need a closer look and potentially more proactive engagement. And they also do, they do this for prospective supplier vetting as well, which is, also helpful to them. But just as an example, one of our clients in the tech industry, they use risk mapping to identify the highest risk suppliers. Then from that exercise, they asked them to participate in the sustainability assessment. And if they did not participate in that, or if they obtained a rating that was below our client's expectation, then they had to have an on-site audit. And as a result of that exercise, they found close to 100 cases of human rights non-compliances. So it's like a funnel approach, right? From risk mapping, with a full supply base, to then the assessment, to then the audit, to really identify the right suppliers to focus on and prioritize the actions, of the teams. Then, of course, the suppliers assessments do provide a lot of data. They have specific flags, they have specific benchmarking indicators by region, industry, company size, and then specific practices from policies, actions, reporting. But also, they do allow to dig deeper in specific topics, whether it is carbon, whether it is human rights, or living wages. There is the ability to figure out, who is, least mature in those areas and posing the greatest risk for the company. And most importantly, they can, track, this data over time, so they can see any changes and developments, which is key, right? We keep talking about the importance of data, and seeing data once is great, but seeing data over time really helps to understand the journey of suppliers and the exposure to risk that each company may have.
Perfect. Thanks, Sylvia. And quickly, for those who are newer to your platform, would we say something like an ESG risk mapping? It sounds very nice, but many supply chains have 20,000 or 15,000 suppliers that they need to interact with. How does it work for them to go and do this type of a risk mapping? Just briefly, how does that work?
To conduct the risk mapping, it would be to essentially review the sustainability profiles by risk and region of the different suppliers. And it's something that it's being adopted more and more by companies, because it's a very, light touch solution compared to, the full comprehensive assessment. And so the risk mapping allows to, have, the entire supply chain. It could be tier 1, but it could also be tier 2 and 3, right? However, much data, however much good data you might have, you can upload that, and that allows you to then view everything through the lenses of for instance, in our case, for our solution, it's the EcoVadis methodology. And so we use our risk profiles to build individual risk profiles for each supplier uploaded, and then we use visualizations to show the different risk scale for different suppliers, and allows we also use like different lenses, whether you're focusing on modern slavery risks or other risks like carbon, to really zero in on those hotspots, and then allows to start that funnel to take action.
Thank you very much. And Fabiana, we've got a specific question for you about the measurement tools that you use for logistics and transportation across the US. You've mentioned the fleet a couple of times, and I think you've piqued some curiosity in the audience.
For specific related to,
I would say ESG, I would say risk management, maybe even load tracking to see where loads are, any of those tools.
I don't know. I would have to check specifically on that, right? But I definitely can check and get an answer for you. My team, from a risk point of view, we use one, but I gotta find which one it is. But yeah, we track a few of these things related to ESG cost and some of that stuff. But the decision to go to hybrid was made on a plain simple business case, because the cost of the hybrid model is slightly higher, and based on the lifespan of the car and how many miles per day they would drive, it made a lot of sense to move over to a hybrid model, and by consequence, it obviously helps the environmental impact of it. But I can check the specific tools we use for all these measurements.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Before we go into our next session, which is going to be about resilience, there's been a couple of questions on greenwashing, which is interesting. Greenwashing has been a big challenge for several years. We now see the opposite of green hushing. Organizations are really often doubling down on what they've been doing these last couple of years, but now don't really want to talk about it, which is too bad, because then we don't get to learn from each other. But there are some questions here on greenwashing, and as we think about how we might identify risks out in the marketplace, are any of you dealing with how to identify greenwashing or policies on greenwashing? And Sylvia, any plans to tackle how do we identify a risk on greenwashing through the platform?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. So let me start, by addressing how we're currently looking at it now. We are, looking at greenwashing from the point of view of legal action through our 360 Watch, which is an engine that crawls over 100,000 different sources and brings everything together and highlights when certain legal events have occurred, and greenwashing is one of them. So we do include that. but it is, it is a very important topic, and it is something that, yeah, as you mentioned, we moved from greenwashing to green hushing, and the truth is that, companies are still increasing their investments in sustainability, but they're reducing their public promotion of sustainability. So in theory, that should help with greenwashing, in general, but we still don't want to go the opposite way, all the way towards the green hushing, which is not, as you mentioned, helping much. But, having said that, we still see companies seeing sustainability as a strategic effort. We're still seeing, executives maintaining or increasing their sustainability investments even this year in 2025. And we're seeing that, companies still see supply chain sustainability specific as a competitive advantage that fosters growth. So we do want to see that, performance, but potentially, to combat the greenwashing, it's key that that data be verified and validated by a provider of your choice.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thank you very much for that. As we think about how do we know what's happening in our organizations, and I often wonder, higher performance in our supply chains often does go hand in hand with more resilient, more mature sustainability knowledge. And I think that often has to do with strong performance management frameworks. So if we can manage any type of performance, we do through our supply chains. Moving on to our third topic today, which is really about resilience, as I mentioned. So we've talked about our general approaches to this idea of procurement and risk through ESG. And our next topic, we talked about how do we even go about identifying some of these risks? There's so many and so many data sources. And now we're going to say, okay, we've identified these risks. How are we building resilience then into our operations, into our supply chains? And can we even start thinking about future-proofing through ESG performance as a strategy? So if we think about it, specific approaches or maybe conversations and perspectives that you're having internally. Mindy, I'll start with you. Maybe a takeaway for those in the audience of one approach that's worked for your team as you think about looking into the future for how to become more resilient.
Yeah, it's a great question. As I mentioned earlier, we take that risk-based approach, and a lot of that is, is about trying to fund the funnel that Sylvia talked about, right? And it's especially, important when we have many, many, many suppliers globally. We also really prioritize progress over perfection. So through our supplier code of conduct and all of our supporting policies, we set a really high bar for our suppliers. But we don't just, hoist our expectations upon them and then walk away. We really view sustainability as a team effort. And so our goal is to build those strong, long-term, mutually beneficial relationships. And so we offer a wide range of support to help suppliers on that journey and help them to succeed. And so, what this could look like, some examples, we sponsor climate training. So we sponsor participation in the supplier leadership on climate transition. And this enables our suppliers to learn how to calculate their carbon footprint, set science-based targets, pursue abatement projects, for example. We also we're fortunate as a large company to have in-house experts on topics like water and waste and renewable energy. And many of the smaller suppliers in our network might not have those dedicated resources. So we look for opportunities to share the wealth and share the knowledge, if you will. So whether that's setting up a webinar for our third-party manufacturers to learn from our resident expert on water and how you can start to set water reduction tactics. And, we try to create those learning opportunities. So I think, and then the good news is that what we see is that suppliers that are going through this process of collaborating with us to meet these high bars and targets, they often uncover operational efficiencies and build resiliency into their own operations. So it's really a win-win It also doesn't hurt that, when they get recognition, so whether it's they're achieving, a high level of, they've gotten their bronze scorecard or gold scorecard from EcoVadis, and they're happy to share that with all their customers. But, I think that once they get on this journey, they're finding that, hey, actually, there's really tangible benefit for us as well. So I think all of that is strengthening the system really overall.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really helpful examples on how you're helping your suppliers, and great that they've got these options that wouldn't have already otherwise been available to them. And you mentioned something at the end there. Sometimes people ask me, like, how do I get started with this? How do we know how to be more sustainable? And sometimes it's a useful lens to say, go look at your process in a new way. We've often tried to go really fast and be really cheap, but we're kind of out of ideas. And so if we go and look at our process and say, how can we be the most sustainable possible, the most responsible we can? And often you find these ideas, Mindy, like you've said, that it's like a memory or a new idea generator for our team. So it can be a fun way to look. Fabienne, I'm interested for you as well. Resilience. Again, it sounds like you've just been through it with the tariffs. And so do you feel more resilient out the other side? Are there learnings you've had through that process? And do you have tips for the audience with us today?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more resilient because now we've got some data. I think the advantage for us, different from Mindy, is most of our spend is in the US and it's consolidated through the US. So we had to prioritize our vendors from big to small and see what would be the impact. And so the tip is get this information early on. Bring not only the where the product is from, but things related to carbon footprint and scoring and things like that, because we never track that, right? And we're starting to do that now with new vendors that come on board, so that we can be more faster in the reactions, especially with so much volatility in the market right now. So start early, build a robust data system that can help you get there, because I have a very good control of my spend, but I don't have a very good control of my vendors. So building that database helps a lot as well. And keep improving your process, right? We are constantly reviewing our process organization, our tools and systems, so that we can be better, be more nimble, more resilient, and get the right information.
Excellent, thank you. And an interesting lens also to look at more spend in the US than the examples that Mindy's been giving. And you also mentioned a great quote that might be a takeaway from today. Control over our spend doesn't mean control over our vendors, even though we wish it did sometimes. Which brings up a question, Sylvia, for you on what does it mean to have effective supplier engagement? Maybe not full control, but maybe a good enough relationship that we'll understand what they're doing and we can partner together when we have these risks, these surprises, that it could be one of their suppliers and they didn't know either. So we're all sort of in it together. So what does it mean to have an effective supplier risk audit versus less effective? And in this case, I'm asking for best practices. What have you seen on the practices that are more successful versus less successful?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's not one single approach for all suppliers in the supply base, right? You will definitely want to prioritize your key and most strategic suppliers versus, the tail end of your supply base. So it's going to look very different depending on who your supplier is, how risky they are, how critical they are, how strategic they are. And you'll likely have different expectations of them, right? The supplier code of conduct applies to all suppliers, but of course there might be additional requirements for your most strategic suppliers, and so that's going to be key, and aligning with your requirements seeing the performance of your suppliers, that's going to be a very effective way to understand like where they're starting from, and then engaging with them, meaning bringing them on the journey with you. So it means really, understanding where they are and meeting them where they are and being okay with that, and then working on incremental progress as we just, we're discussing, instead of expecting, right away, a huge improvement in performance. Having said that, communicating clear expectations and potential targets for the resolutions of corrective actions and improvements in scores is absolutely a best practice. And we do encourage our clients to be very, very transparent with their suppliers. Now, to that very specific question about, what are, this, effective supplier risk audit, what are the considerations to evaluate, right? Like, the make versus buy considerations, right? It's, in a way, scalability is going to be the biggest consideration, in-house expertise, in-house costs. So this is where it depends on what you currently have versus, what, is out there in the market. So we do typically work with our clients and do some of this work with make versus buy analysis with them to show them how they would benefit from one solution versus the other. But those would be the most important considerations.
Wow, I think those are great best practices for folks that make versus buy, or do you have the experts? Are you lucky, like Mindy's team, to have those on your team, or do you need to partner with others? Let's launch that second poll now. So we're really going to ask you about your risk management strategy. And as we do so, I'm interested from our panelists. You'd said something, Sylvia, on let's make sure we're clear on communication, which is always a good practice, regardless of what we're doing. And then also we're clear on the targets. What is it that we're asking people to perform against? How do we do effective target setting? Sometimes we have an industry standard we can look towards, but I'm curious, Fabiano, Mindy, Sylvia, the best practices again that you see, how do you have the conversations with your suppliers on what to measure and then how well they need to perform against that? And is that annual? How does that work?
So in my case, it's not structured at all, right? And I think it's a lesson learned that I do need to have a much better structured conversation with, especially the some of our more larger and ESG related vendors, right? Um, but it's not structured or formal at all. And I just found out, to answer your question, Deborah, prior, we use Covadis in our ESG team. So there you have
Learning
it.
something every day.
Yes. And I think the lesson here as well is I didn't know we had Covadis in our company, so why not start bringing to the procurement organization too? So
Sylvia,
we'll
you may
have
be
more
in a phone
news
call,
in a few
a
months.
one-on-one session after this one. It is funny though, Fabiano, I find this all the time, that large organizations like yours actually have a license for something. Many parts of the organization doesn't know that they do. And so here comes teams like yours have done the best that they can in buying the best, getting the best deal, and the use of it sure becomes the challenge. Let's see the results of the poll if we can, so you all can see how you're doing against your peers. And again, just over half have started to tie ESG goals to the risk management strategy. Mostly planning to soon. And again, if you're not sure on this, try to go and find out. Sometimes purely that exploration of trying to find out will teach you more about your organization than you've learned in a long time, and should be quite interesting for you. So try not to get frustrated, try to enjoy the process. We're going to go into our final question for the panelists today. And if you do have any questions for them, you've got about 6 minutes left to submit those. So panelists, how are you putting sustainability and ESG into practice through the integration with procurement? We've talked about risks and how we identify those. We've talked about resilience. Now, specifically, the power of procurement. Everything that everybody has ever bought, procurement bought it first. So you sit in a great position to influence what goes into the market and what goes into our businesses. Mindy, I'll start with you on this one. What is one or two ways that your team is using procurement to have more sustainable practices?
Yeah. So, I'm lucky in terms of the way we're structured. So I report to our chief procurement officer and have a seat at the procurement leadership team table. So we've been able to really embed ESG and sustainability goals into our procurement strategy and our goals and objectives. So right alongside our goals as it relates to quality and cost savings and innovation and service and all the traditional procurement topics, we have goals like moving our strategic suppliers towards setting, having them set science-based targets. And we have goals around how much of our, spend has been assessed and monitored for compliance with our code, and how many of our dollars are flowing through EcoVadis, for example. So we've been able to really embed those things into our procurement goals, so that everybody in procurement globally understands kind of what those priorities are. And to kind of bring it back to the topic on how we're setting goals, then also with our suppliers, we've given the procurement team tools so that they can go out and integrate this conversation into their supplier relationship management discussions. So if they are going out and having a top-to-top meeting with their supplier, I obviously can't join hundreds of supplier meetings, but my team has created toolkits and scripts so that they are equipped to talk to them about climate, right? And to talk to them about why we want them to set a science-based target. And we've created, kind of simple slides that they can drop into a deck, complete with the talking points, So we're trying to really empower the teams to talk the talk and to integrate this into discussions. And frankly, we're seeing, a lot of the procurement team is really excited to have this conversation, especially, younger team members, people, they're excited that this is part of our values, that this is, front and center in our beliefs as a company.
Oh, that's excellent. I want to be on your team, Mindy, and have access to all
You're very
these
welcome.
talking points. Thank you very much.
We're trying to make it very easy for everybody. Everybody's got an awful lot to do, so we're trying to make it, easy to add this to their plate.
I think that's a great tip for those who are listening. Fabiana, one way procurement is helping to support responsible operations. One idea from you, and Sylvia, I'll give you the last word after that.
I think measure. One thing that we're trying to get this year is getting more measurement points where we can assess not only the vendors, but also our internal process and how to be more efficient. So it's not only targets related to ESG, but also targets related to number of transactions, preferred vendors versus non-preferred vendors. And these things matter because at the end of the day, if we can measure our preferred vendors and narrow our spend through those, we can optimize our ESG and any other metric that you have out there. So to me is in a using different words, address your tail spend and measure and make sure that you narrow your spend of vendors to those that help you achieve ESG and other targets.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And Sylvia, one tip or takeaway for listeners who joined us today, what would you leave them with?
Collaboration is key. I know that sounds like something everybody say, but it's the truth. This is a very important space to collaborate, whether it is across peers or buyers to suppliers, as Mindy mentioned. This helps to enable progress and create shared value.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, panelists, for joining me Thank you all for coming today, and stay tuned for the Reuters Sourcing and Procurement USA conference in November in Houston. Thank you to EcoVadis for sponsoring today's session. I sure learned a lot. I hope you all did too. And thank you for joining this Reuters webinar on the future proofing of procurement strategic risk management for a resilient supply chain.
Thank you.